everybody, and welcome back to the Marketing for Learning podcast. You've got Ashley Hinchcliffe here. I'm still saying Sinclair a lot of the time. It's going to take me a while to get used to my new last name. And I'm really excited today because this is episode 3 in our transformation series. And today we're really focusing on the impact of employee experience. If it's a bad one, what does that do for your learners? And if it's a good one, how can that positively impact the value perception and ROI of your learning function? I have the privilege and honor of being joined by a wonderful guest and a lady I have had the honor of knowing for a very long time. I think we go all the way back to the Kineo days, like over a decade ago. So I've got Georgie Cooke here, who is the co-founder and head of learning experience design at Lima Delta. And she is going to spitball with me all about employee experience. But before we get started there, Georgie, would you mind doing say hey, first of all, of course, but would you mind just telling people a little bit more about your background, who you are, and kind of, I guess, why you're in a good position to talk about things like employee experience and learning experience design?
Absolutely. Hello, thanks for having me. And yeah, like you say, we go way back. My background is in learning design, and I've worked in several learning design agencies over my career, which is where our paths have crossed a couple of times before. So I've really kind of cut my teeth designing your classic e-learning over the years. And with all that experience, I guess what I really learn is that not all digital learning solutions are created equal. At one end of the spectrum, you've got perhaps what comes to mind when you just say the word e-learning, and I'm sure everyone has their own reaction to that word and their own image of what that means. But then right at the other end of the spectrum, you can have these really kind of elegant digital solutions to problems in businesses. And I realised that's the end I really wanted to be at. So in 2020, founded Lima Delta with my partner, Simon. We've built a team, and now we specialise in creating those digital experiences that help make change happen in organisations. So worked with lots of different clients, lots of different sizes of organisation, and, you know, I've learned a lot from them over the years as well. So hopefully I can share a bit of that.
I love that. Make change happen. And I think, you know, we are a function that has the ability to do that if we put the time and energy into getting it right. And obviously this is a really critical component of this. Like, the way I look at this is kind of like, this is our product, right? This is what people are consuming. This is what they're using. It's important that we make sure that it's correct. And obviously we'll dig into a little bit more of like what that actually means. But let's talk, okay, employee experience. In your terms, what is that? Because we can talk about learner experience, and that's one thing, but I kind of want to zoom out a little bit more and focus on the employee experience first. What's that to you?
Good question. I think it's quite a big thing. Employee experience, I guess, ultimately is everything that shapes how an employee feels about where they work and what their experience is like of being there. And lots of things feed into that. So everything from their actual day-to-day tasks and their role through to the learning and development opportunities that are available to them, their experience with their manager, their experience with how their team functions. Ultimately, I think a lot of it comes down to the culture of the organisation, really. What's that like? What's it like as an environment to be in, psychologically, physically? I think all of those things combine to create the employee experience, and I think it's probably still quite underestimated how important it is. There's all those stats about how people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. I'm not sure they leave managers. I think they might leave cultures and employee experiences that aren't working for them.
Managers are a byproduct of the culture too, aren't they, really?
Exactly. So I think employee experience is a kind of big nebulous thing with lots of different things that feed into it.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I asked that question, because I expected you'd say something similar, is the principle that L&D only plays a small part in that experience, and it can be a very integral and influential part, but we have to obviously consider the landscape that people are experiencing our learning products in the bigger kind of vein of things, as it were. And so again, when we're looking at designing and developing learning experiences for people, if we don't have that broader awareness of what's actually going on in the broader organization, what people are experiencing, it can mean that our learning products won't hit the right notes because we don't understand the sentiment of our audiences. I mean, we see quite a lot. There's often a big disparity between what employees are saying. I'd like to write a guide on it, if I'm honest, what employees are saying versus what L&D thinks is happening in terms of that organizational culture. Because I think what we feel and experience as learning professionals, yeah, we work at that company too, but there's a very big difference to other functions, other parts of the business. Are they deskless? What experience are they having as a result of that? And I think that, again, it is kind of an ineffable thing in some ways, but it's crucial that we understand that piece before we go gung-ho with creating learning experiences, right?
Right. And I think the nature of lots of learning and development teams, lots of HR teams are a centralised function. And just by the nature of that organisational setup, it means they are to some degree separated from the more operational work that the business is doing. And that's through no fault of their own. That's just the way the company hierarchy has been set up. And so I think some of the L&D teams that I work with that really do have their finger on the pulse with the employee experience and what their learners really need are the ones who either break out of that setup and actually have people whose role is to straddle HR or learning and operational work. So they kind of have a foot in both camps. So they really are on the ground. They have roles which are kind of part learning and part doing in some other part of the business. Or they're the teams who kind of recognise that they do have that potential, area where they do have that potential blind spot, and they're working around that in other ways with listening groups, how they understand their audience better. So there's definitely ways to combat that. But I think if you're not, if you're not aware of what you might not be seeing and understanding about how the rest of the organisation works, that can definitely filter through into what you create, and perhaps a mismatch, as you described.
Yeah, because the truth is we don't know what we don't know, and I think it's always a fascinating experience. Like, we do discovery a lot, and actually the previous episode of this was all around engaging stakeholders. And we're not just talking about influencing the C-suite and getting that, elusive seat at the table. This is more broadly actually building relationships with cross-functional relationships, like you alluded to, a stronger bond with HR. These are all people functions. We kind of all have a similar goal and a similar objective. There should be this kind of broader connection piece and this kind of, just a broader view in terms of how is it what all of us are doing impacting the employee. Like, HR sending 5 emails today and L&D sending 2, and then internal comms as 3 because the CEO is announcing something. Like, you can start to see, even just from a messaging and comms perspective, how cumbersome that becomes. Never mind when we start to look at a technology landscape and there's this over here and that over there, and you've got to remember your logins, but that one's not SSO, and it just gets very confusing for everybody. And we see a lot, people just are overwhelmed and they don't know where to start. Do you see the similar sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. And I think even more so, really depends on the business, but I was about to say even more so when we think about this in a lot of the situations you just described, I think a lot of us might come to mind that our audience are people in offices still, and they're dealing with all these emails coming through, and it's too much and it's hectic, and the tech stack, and all of that is completely true. And then all of that is doubled and tripled if, for example, the majority of your employees are actually engineers who are working in vans driving up and down the country, or maybe they are working on vessels, or, our audiences can be, in some cases, their environment can be so different to the central functions who are designing for them. And that is not anyone's fault or problem. It's just a fact that we need to understand and really understand what is their environment and what is their experience, and how can we give them the best possible chance of, in our case, what we're talking about, learning and developing. We need to make sure we're designing for their experience and the reality of their day-to-day in order for it to even really be possible, let alone preferable from their perspective, to engage with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think it's refreshing to hear as well that, same with your company, you're only developing content with research behind it, because I don't think At least in my experience, I don't always see that being the case. There's a couple of different use cases for things like e-learning or learning experiences, whichever. I guess they are very different things, so I won't package them up the same. But, essentially, you either have someone across the business saying we need X, Y, and Z, so that then gets translated to either we create that ourselves as a learning function, or we outsource and bring in an external provider, or we don't really know what we need, so we're just going to get all of the things and we're going to put all of the things on our system, and then everybody has everything. They have access to everything that they could ever want and need, and that's a perfect experience. Both of these are quite flawed, aren't they?
Yes, it's almost the kind of too little or too much.
Yeah.
So I can completely see the reasoning from one perspective with the idea of, say you buy into a really big content library and there's loads there and you sort of think, well, this is great. We're empowering people to choose what they want. There's so much available. We recognize people have different needs. They can take what they want from it. I think at an abstract level, and in some organizations and cultures, that can be the right thing. If you do have a real high performance culture with really motivated people who are really in charge of their own career development, then I think there are worlds where that works for sure. But I think for the vast majority of people, in my experience anyway, I think employees really do want to learn and upskill. Like, they want to have the skills they need to still be really integral to their organizations and to secure their future career. But their desire to learn and develop isn't this kind of abstract, oh, give me 2 days and I'd love to just see what's in this content library and explore everything. I think the reality is that they do want to learn and develop, but they want to know that what they're learning and developing is going to give them something back. They want to know, this is the thing that's going to help me get from A to B, or this is something that is super important to the business, and I know I need to be upskilled in this area for my next promotion or for the vision of the business. And so I think the best solutions are not these kind of off-the-shelf options and not help yourself to anything, but more, we're going to help guide you with what's super relevant to you and your role into our business, so that you know that the time you're investing in this learning and training is getting you somewhere you want to go. And I think if we can nail that, we tap into this intrinsic motivation in our employees. They are intrinsically motivated, I think, to, like I say, be upskilled, be relevant, be integral to the organization. And if we can give them something that taps into that, we start to create that win-win.
Yeah, I would even play in, not a devil's advocate, because I actually totally agree with what you're saying. I think people are intrinsically motivated to benefit themselves. So the same things that you're saying still apply, in that if they can understand and trust that the transaction between learning and them is going to be a valuable one to them in whatever way that is, then they're much more likely to engage with that. So we're in a bit of a situation, I think, where we need to build more value and trust with our audiences and with the business, because at the moment we're in a scenario where you've just described, where there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't have a huge amount of purpose or direction, and certainly lacks relevancy for a lot of the organization as far as I can see, which of course then just leads to greater and wider disengagement and, huge loss of ROI for the business, for the function and for the business. So let's talk a little bit. Obviously, you said at the beginning, when in your intro, you've worked with a lot of different organizations. You've seen tons of, every permutation of approach to learning design and learning experience design that I expect you can fathom. What sort of common challenges or gaps have you observed in how organizations deliver learning experiences? Is there anything that people are tending to kind of overlook that you think, why aren't we doing that? Obviously, we talked about the audience research piece, but is there anything else that you commonly see?
I think the audience research is a good one, not because I think that people don't think about it or don't understand that it's important, but I think it can be challenging, particularly in a really large organisation. It doesn't feel realistic to be sending out specific learner surveys and getting insights on every single project you ever do, because again, how would that contribute to the employee experience? That's another 600 emails people are getting. So I think there are some real challenges just practically around, we know we want to do this, we know we want to get here, we know we want this research. How do we actually execute that? So I think that's an interesting challenge, and one that I've seen different organizations tackle in different ways. Like, I think a lot of the most successful solutions to that challenge I've seen are ones where, rather than attempting to create sort of new research each time, companies are really thinking about what already exists that we can tap into. So, for example, I've worked on a couple of projects recently where the L&D team have actually worked with kind of existing employee groups that already exist. So looking for these groups that already exist. So, for example, we were doing a piece on inclusion for a client recently, and they have a kind of ability network of colleagues that already exist within the organization. So they already exist as this group that meet sort of every month to support each other and share ideas about what's going on. A great group to tap into, who can give us their lived experience that feed into them what we create. They can be part of that audience insights. They can be user testers. So I think it's things like that, looking for who are these groups that already exist. Perhaps it's a group of like future leaders on a future leader program, people that are likely to really want to engage with what you're doing and be part of shaping solutions. So I think there's ways around challenges like that, but there are definitely logistic things about how do you actually get those audience insights.
Yeah, and when I spoke with Derek Mitchell at the first episode, we talked all about data. And it was really, he said, there's just a wealth of data that we do have. That, if you think there's a digital footprint, there's digital exhaust from everybody in the organization. Even things like your SharePoint or, whatever Yammer's called these days, or Facebook for business, or I can't keep track of what all these things change their names to. But we have these social systems internally, large enterprise organizations at the minimum, but even things like Slack. There's a lot of sentiment that's captured in there that you can certainly be privy to. I don't think it necessarily replaces the need for that kind of qualitative aspect to hear their voices and amplify them, but it should be supplemented with data that already exists, even things like HR data. Yep. I think the biggest blocker that we see is the economies of scale that come with that. So I feel like L&D bake their noodle on this all the time, which is, okay, well, if I get all this research and what comes back is everyone wants like a personalized, relevant learning experience, how do I do that on a granular level for each individual person within that organization? So I then always think, well, you have to kind of work like personas do, right? We have to find ways that unite job functions or roles. Okay, so I don't know, someone in marketing, someone in finance, and someone in ops, but there's actually core skills that those functions require or want. Therefore, we can maybe look at building those. And so you still need to, you can't do, AI can help with some of that personalization piece if you have content libraries. I don't think that's where the human employee experience really gets improved, in my opinion. But I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
I think it is interesting because I don't think employees are crying out for something that's tailored specifically to them as an individual. I don't think there's ever an expectation that if you're one employee out of tens of thousands in an organisation, that something's going to have been designed specifically for you, or for you and the 10 other people that are in your specific job role. I think it's about it being relatable and relevant enough. So if to come back to my engineering example, you can tell I'm working with a couple of engineering clients at the moment. If I work out in the field and the learning experiences come to me and all of the scenarios are office based, that just feels like I haven't been considered, which I guess from a personal point of view, you're a bit like, oof, I haven't been considered. That just doesn't feel great from an employee experience point of view. But also, I'm just probably going to look at that and think, yeah, but I'm never in that situation. That doesn't ever happen to me. I never have to think about my meeting etiquette. I don't have meetings. I have like 10-minute huddles with my team in the morning before we all head out, So I think it's just about thinking, what are the really key differentiators and how can you be relevant enough to those people? And everyone else then obviously has their own, they can then interpret the real detail for themselves. And I think we should trust that people can do that. But it's about making it relevant enough and showing that you have genuinely considered everybody, not just to be nice, but because if you haven't, you're probably not giving them what they actually need to get better and improve if their situation hasn't been considered.
Yeah. So how do we go about doing that? We get audience insights, and then, you know, if you have any examples, I'd love to hear them. But how do we actually go about creating a sense of personalization without offering pure, you know, true personalization like, you know, MarTech can do, where it's like, you clicked on this, and this, and I'm going to then serve you up this, and this as a consequence, because we just don't have the technology, the sophisticated technology to do that in L&D. How are you kind of overcoming that?
I think it probably happens in a few stages. Firstly, it is about getting those audience insights up front, testing your own assumptions. So as I said, that can be tapping into groups that already exist where you can find that kind of data. It can be doing some user interviews. I'm working with a client at the moment who are rolling out a new leadership piece, and rather than just thinking about what do our senior stakeholders want our leaders to do, they also ran some listening groups with leaders at all levels in all different parts of the organisation to hear what their challenges were. And then it's about marrying what are those challenges with what does the business want and bringing them together. So there's definitely that upfront piece. Then I think it's about designing and developing without putting too much burden on people in the business, because they've got their own jobs to do, but getting them to try and sense check what you're doing at a couple of points along the journey. So basically doing some user testing a couple of times throughout the process, and being okay with what you hear from that, and being okay
it is your baby, but the feedback is important.
Exactly. And then if possible, again, launching a pilot. So pilot group, small group, because then if you do get some of that feedback, you've got an opportunity to change and improve before you go out to tens of thousands of people. So yeah, I think up front, and then taking those insights into your design, checking the design at a couple of points, and then running a pilot. I think that's the best way to get a sense of how something's going to land before it lands with tens of thousands of people, and then you can't really take it back.
I love that. So you've almost woven in a couple of iterative feedback loops within the kind of process. So, you know, you're kind of like stopping and then going a circle around, and then, you know, it's not linear in the truest sense of the word, which I really like. I have a question for you. I was just thinking when you were talking. So obviously, as a person who talks to a lot of employees, works with a lot of learning functions that tend to have a very bloated learning offering with a platform, loads of off-the-shelf libraries, like so much stuff that most people don't even know what is actually available. There's just the volumes there. Do you find your clients are like, do they know why they're making the thing that they want making? Do you understand what I'm asking by that? So like, I sometimes think we create learning experiences because we feel like we need to or we should, but it's not always like related to anything the business is doing or someone somewhere has told us we should, so we do. I'm just curious, like, with the origins of some of your projects, and you may not know, and if you don't, by all means, just tell me to bugger off. But, you know, I'm just curious, because I do see that sometimes as a bit of a way of doing in our functions that can sometimes be quite limiting in terms of that value piece, that value perception piece.
I would say it differs by organisation. A lot of the work that we do is about creating the learning experiences that help make a change happen. So often they are really tied to an important change or transformation that's going on in the business, whether that is something like a new leadership framework being rolled out because a merger's just happened and they're trying to unite all their leaders under the same vision. Or it might be a big process or way of working is changing, and so we need to upskill people on the new way of doing things. So a lot of the time, what we're doing is linked very closely with a business need, and often our client will be actually not always the L&D team. Often the L&D team will be there, but actually the need and the budget, and everything else will be coming from the part of the business that's implementing that change. And then they are often partnering with their L&D team and us. So it's kind of this great partnership. So in a lot of cases, that's how it works, and that's great, because then you know that it's really coming from the part of the business that's feeling the pain, that really understands where they're trying to get to, what success looks like, why it matters. But it's not always the case. I think sometimes the bigger the organization gets, the harder that is, because everything sort of gets funneled through centralized teams, and sometimes that centralized L&D team is quite far away from the business need. So it's not always this, wonderful process of the need originating in the business and us having direct insight to that. There is a challenge there. I think sometimes, as much as L&D are really trying to, it's not always easy for them to really get into that bit of the business and find out what the origin of the project was. So that does sometimes happen as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I this is exactly why we're saying, like, go and make friends with other people in the business, like, be part of those conversations, because this isn't a thing that's going to happen overnight. If we want to be more involved in bigger business decisions, like what you're talking about it's such a crucial part of L&D in terms of change management. That is, change management to me as well as like education and communication, because it's like a thing is happening and we need to kind of tell you what all the things are, but also we need to make sure that it's executed in a really sensible way so that people are getting the right information at the right time. Yeah. Especially when it comes to, because obviously even there what I've described is probably a very blended experience, I would have thought, like rather than just, you're kind of, here's a destination, here's lots of different learning experiences and crack on. Do you feel like blended is the way to go, or these kind of much more structured, thought out experiences rather than, or do they complement each other? What's your stance on the kind of overall experience from a learning perspective?
I guess I always say that a one-hit wonder rarely works. So blended is always the way to go. So no matter how amazing an experience is, if it's a one-off really powerful workshop or a one-off digital simulation that really impacts you, even if it is really that impactful, if you only see it once, it's probably unlikely to really stick and get reinforced. So the vast majority of the time when we work with clients, we're creating more blended journeys or campaigns and really blurring the line, as you said there, between communicating change and upskilling and empowering people to really act in the way they need to because of that change. And it's about blending both of those for sure. And also, I think I was just reflecting on what you said there about not always understanding the origin of a project and why we're doing what we're doing. And I wonder if sometimes that disconnect between an L&D function and the business is that perhaps I think the business might have a bit of sometimes an outdated idea of what L&D can do. They might be thinking, I only need to talk to L&D if I want a face-to-face training or an e-learning. And so therefore, it's that misconception of what L&D is and what it can offer that means the business perhaps isn't going there and saying, hey, I've got this problem, can you help me solve it? Because they've already got in their mind what they think the solution that the L&D team would offer. Whereas actually, I think I've seen L&D teams do so many more things than that, things that are much more useful, things that are much more embedded in the flow of work or that are really experiential. And I think sometimes it's about needing to try and press a bit of a reset between how the business perceives the L&D function and what they can offer. And actually, if we can showcase what we can do, then perhaps the business will be more open to coming to talk to us about what's the best way to solve this problem, rather than only coming to us when they think they need an e-learning.
I mean, just nodding vigorously for those that are listening, because obviously you can't see me doing that. I couldn't agree more. I do think we have and again, not all of our own doing. I think sometimes I come across as being really hard on L&D, like, this is what we're doing wrong. to me, because I'm not a learning person, I'm quite objective to the process and can sometimes feel like I can see things a little bit more clearly. But we do have a reputational issue internally. Most people, in fact, the last episode, me and Han were talking about training needs analysis, right? Oh, well, let's do a training needs analysis and identify what training we need. Hold on. You've started by saying this person, we need training to solve this problem. So, again, if you're coming to L&D to solve a training problem, then you're going to get training. So it's almost, again, that kind of zooming out. Like I propose something like a performance need analysis. What do we need to solve this problem? And if we have stronger bonds with other functions, and especially the people function, but just a wider business, we can tackle these grander problems such as change in a way that makes sense, where learning plays a role and HR plays a role and internal comms plays a role, rather than working in our silos and having this really disjointed employee experience across all those functions. So I do totally agree. I think that the truth of the matter is we have to own that narrative, though. I do think a lot of organizations are at the stage that you've just described, where there is a very clear idea of what L&D does, both from an employee perspective and from a leadership and stakeholder perspective. This is what learning and L&D is in my business. It's up to us to kind of change that narrative. And part of that, again, is, brand work. And I don't mean get some new colors and a logo. I mean, who are we? Do your brand house, do your value proposition work, really understand what it is that you're doing, what are your core goals as a learning function, how do you align to the business? But then you've got to be more consultative too. You have to go out and talk to the business. If we want to be treated like a really core participator in business activities, then we have to be in the places that those things are occurring. And we have to be acting as an authority when those conversations are being had. And I don't always think that I think we can be quite passive. I think we can sit and kind of wait for things to come to us, because that's just the box we're kind of stuck in, unfortunately.
I was going to say, as you were thinking, it made me think of that phrase, ask for forgiveness, not permission. And
love it.
I think sometimes it's probably unlikely. Well, this again, it really all depends on the culture in the team. But if you are in an L&D team where you feel like the business doesn't really understand what you can offer, and you're not being brought in early enough to really, deliver the best that you could deliver, if that is the case, and there is a bit of a reputation problem with L&D, then people probably aren't going to come to you and ask you for your consultancy, but you can still consult. So when somebody comes to you and says, okay, I'm here because I need some e-learning on this process change, going, great, yep, I can absolutely help you with that, doesn't mean that you can't make that first meeting with them consultative and digging into, okay, give me the background. What is it that makes you think you need some e-learning? What are you hearing from people? What do you imagine the e-learning would solve? And I just think that's your golden opportunity to showcase what it could be instead. So sometimes people can only imagine what they've seen before. So somebody might be coming to you saying, I need some e-learning, because they've seen that the business has done e-learning before. They've just got that in their head. It's not actually that they're closed to anything else. It's just that that's a reference point they've got. So if you can go in and say, yeah, we could do e-learning. This is what that would be like. But also, did you know, we've also done some cool stuff like these video explainers, or we could do a little podcast series on this where we get voices from within the business talking about this change that's going on, or here's a really awesome scenario that we've done before. I think it's about taking that opportunity to almost show and tell the breadth of what you can do, and get people excited about it. Who doesn't want one of those things over an e-learning? I think it's about seizing those opportunities as they come. They might not be presented to you as an opportunity to do performance consulting, but you can still do that in that slot, and ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Yeah,
I love that. And saying no more often too, this can be in our vocabulary. We can say no too, right? I think if we are very clear on what the business is trying to achieve, we have a clear strategy that aligns with that. We don't have to have these transactional orders given to us and just do. Again, there can be a much more informed triage type conversation where, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Because maybe you don't need the learning module at all. Maybe a simple one-pager will be enough with a couple of emails to support it. Or, again, it really comes down to understanding, from my perspective anyways, what it is that you're trying to achieve. We shouldn't start with, I need training. What problem are we trying to solve? And is any type of training or educational experience or employee experience, learning experience, whatever you want to call it, is that what we should be doing? Or is there, is there a simple, like Occam's razor is the simplest solution, the best one?
Yeah, I've got a good example of that, actually, like a recent one where this is quite interesting. So we were working with a client there, huge company. They do snacks and beverages, and we're working with their marketing team who have just the number of processes that they follow is huge. There's so many orders they have to do things in, processes to go through, gateways with all their creative ideas. There's loads there. And their original solution was a really big e-learning module that broke down all of those processes into those different sections. And the idea was you would go through it all once so that you get an understanding of how it all works, and then you can revisit it for the parts of the process that you need when you're doing them. But we could see quite a lot of data to see this wasn't happening. So the people just were not returning to this learning module because it was buried on a learning management system that nobody sort of really went to. And so people were forced through it once at a time that wasn't relevant to them because they weren't doing that process then they'd forget about it, or if they did want to go back to it, they couldn't find it. So it was essentially not really serving the purpose that it should have done. And by having that data and with a little bit of audience insight into, well, where do they go when they're trying to find out what they should be doing next in this process, where do they go? That was what meant we could see actually this learning module isn't really the answer. What they need is a much simpler it was like a machine readable PDF that we ended up creating that would then integrate with their AI enabled platform that they actually used. And it meant they can type into that platform what happens after X in the process. And the platform would then serve up the relevant couple of pages of this PDF because it was machine readable in the way that a SCORM file wasn't. So it's a good example of how if you'd gone into it saying, we need to train people on this process, you're going to be coming up with solutions like the original one, a learning module. Whereas if you're saying, actually, the problem is that people get a bit lost and overwhelmed in these processes and need to know what to do next, when you stop framing it as a learning solution, then actually what you come up with is something that's much more useful and can be available at the point of need. And so we ended up creating that machine readable PDF. And then because this process would get updated regularly, we got into this like quarterly cadence of doing that. And every quarter there would be a little podcast that with the senior leader talking about what's changed and why. So a completely different solution, which is interesting because I think, again, a learning experience that word experience can sometimes make us think that everything has to be a really immersive, exciting, experiential thing. But actually sometimes something really simple that you can search for, find a specific answer, access at the point of need, that is a really good experience because it's serving me exactly what I need in the moment that I need it. So just remembering, I think that a great learning experience doesn't always have to be whizzy. It can be actually sometimes, as you say, the simpler solutions are sometimes the most elegant ones.
As well, I think that is such a brilliant approach for several reasons. One, you've gone where you know the audience is. So again, I think we have a tendency to expect people to come to us a la Kevin Costner, I made my learning place here, you should come to the learning place. But they don't have time, they're busy and they just need to know what they need to know when they need to know it. That's the truth of the matter. And I think, just kind of furthering that, again, really considering, okay, what are people really needing from this? They don't necessarily need to memorize the process. Over time, of course, they will as they use the process more. We know that. But really, they just need that information when they need it. So it's the equivalent of me going on, well, maybe searching on Google earlier when Riverside was live streaming. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I need to fix it. I just need that information right then and there. Whether that commits to my memory or not, as a learning experience is kind of moot in some scenarios because we're enabling someone to do their jobs better through knowledge. So whilst they're not undertaking a training in the truest sense of the word, they're still being given important information at the point that they need it. They don't need to commit it to memory. They know where they need to go if they need that information again. That is good enough, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of debate at the moment with obviously everyone using ChatGPT a lot more than, you hear a lot of this sort of scaremongering about, are we going to stop learning things, and are we going to completely lose our ability to kind of retain things because all we're doing is searching for the answers and being served them immediately? And there can be a separate, more academic debate about whether that is a good or a bad thing. But I think the reality is that is how we function in the workplace. We are needing to look up and find answers for things all the time, because change is the only constant. Things are constantly changing. The way we do things are constantly changing. We're adapting. We're trialing new ways of working. And actually spending loads of time committing loads of detailed processes and things to memory when they're probably going to change again in 2 weeks isn't necessarily the way to do it. There are some things where you do really need to have that depth of learning experience. Often when it's a more behavioural based thing, then that depth is really needed. But for a lot of knowledge based solutions, I think it's actually about ease of access and point of need, rather than a really deep and immersive thing.
And especially in those sort of scenarios where the knowledge isn't available on ChatGPT or Google. This is a very organizational specific process. They can't Google and go, hey, I don't know what company it is, but like, hey, what's the internal marketing process for Heineken? Like that does not exist anywhere. So that is an internal problem that needs to be solved and resolved. I think that's a really elegant, simple solution to probably really serious pain, I would have thought. I bet they're delighted with that. You haven't taken them out of their ecosystems. You haven't made them leave their places of work on their desks to go and do anything. It's just giving them the information that they need when they need it.
Yeah. And something I'd be interested in, I don't know the answer to this, but I'd be interested in whether the audience perceive that as a learning solution. My guess would be they don't. I don't think that they are thinking when they are served up what they need. I doubt they're thinking, oh, that was a great bit of training. And that's okay, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, L&D's role isn't necessarily to be applauded for amazing training experiences. That is one part of what L&D do. But I think actually the more that we can be ingratiated in everything else that's going on and just be part of all the other more operational systems and ways of working, the better. Because like you say, then we're not expecting people to come out of where they work and into our ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, in so many cases, if learning's invisible, then it's doing its job well, I think. There are absolutely, as you've described, certain contexts where people need to go through really important training experiences and blended things, manager, leadership, onboarding, all of that stuff. Like, this structured training's crucial and really important. But I do think there is a lot that is unmeasurable. And again, we're infatuated with, but that's a learning thing. That's learning. Let's let go of the ego. It doesn't matter if people know it was us that did it. Our job is to ensure that they're getting what they need when they need it. And, I do think that, like, when you were describing that solution with the AI, in my head, I just thought so many people wouldn't like that because they can't track it. They wouldn't know, I can't measure that. But we don't need to measure. I don't get me wrong. I think measurement and stuff is really important for stuff that's really important. There's got to be a balance of, I don't need to know when, I can check in maybe after 3 months and ensure that this is working, but I don't need SCORM. I don't need XAPI. I don't need to track everything.
Yeah, and that did come up on this project. That was a pushback to the solution, for sure, because it is a big cultural shift, I think, away from this idea of measuring. And with this particular project, the goal is we're piloting this approach and we're going to see how it goes and go from there. But I think the reason we sort of managed to get past that is because we actually did have data from the previous SCORM solution and we saw that wasn't working.
Yeah.
People weren't going back to it. So that gives us, again, the freedom to try something new. But again, I think it's just thinking about the different ways you can measure it. And ultimately, I mean, this is much easier said than done. I don't want to minimize how challenging this can be. But ultimately, we don't really need to measure the learning element if we can measure the performance changing. That's what we should really be measuring, and then accepting that learning is only one part of what impacts that. But ultimately that's what we're trying to change. So in this particular solution, if this process is carried out correctly, and if that means the brands perform better, then the organisation is solving its problem, and L&D is part of that solution, rather than it mattering quite so much how many people
who did what
on this thing. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, because I often wonder if, like, when you're talking there, because obviously, like, I don't see a lot of learning functions doing a huge amount of measurement at the best of times, but I do think there is this, like, over-policing, I think, of the learning experiences, because we need to kind of, yeah, but we did that. So, like, because we got to justify ourselves almost, you know, because, like, if we just have all these really silent experiences lurking underneath, how do we substantiate that what we're doing is valuable? And I think from my perspective, and I'd be interested in hearing yours, is, again, not everything is going to be, these like really integral business interventions that, you know, L&D can help with change management and all of these really important things. There's also a lot of other stuff where we need to just serve our people better with the knowledge that they need, or whatever that looks like. So there's like these really big strategic pieces that should be measured and monitored, because that's where a lot of your budget and investment is going to go. And then all the kind of smaller, you know, really the minutiae of it all, we can let go of that if we're confident that we've done the due diligence and the work behind it to ensure that those experiences are aligned to the audience and the requirements of that audience.
I'd agree. And I think perhaps measuring less but better is perhaps more effective than trying to measure everything, but the measurement itself not giving us loads of valuable data to work with. Because the other thing I see is the kind of, you know, measuring things, but you've also locked it down to the extent that people have to click on everything in order to complete it. So therefore, you sort of know that if you're mandating that people do it by a certain date, or there's a consequence, they're going to do it. So then your data shows that they've done it, but your data doesn't really give you anything beyond that. It doesn't really give you anything about how much they really took from it, or if their performance has changed as a result. So it's that balance, I think, of it might be better to focus on putting a bit more energy into figuring out how you measure something really valuable on the more strategic pieces, and, like you say, let some of the other bits go. And I think, again, this doesn't have to be a big overnight radical shift in how you approach everything within your team. For us at Lima Delta, we like to work in kind of experiments with different things. If we're trying to change a process internally, then we just sort of say, right, we're going to do this for a month and see how it goes. So L&D teams could try that, like just try one project, not measuring something the way you used to, and exploring something else instead, and see how that goes. Then it doesn't mean you've suddenly deleted a year's worth of data if you want to go back on your decision, but you're testing and experimenting with new ways of doing things.
Yeah, and I mean, the truth of the matter is a lot of this data is redundant because we're not doing anything with it. The business in its present state certainly doesn't find it valuable. So what's the point of it? You know, like, I've worked in marketing functions for a very long time, and especially when I was in-house, when GDPR came in particular, there was this huge issue with lots and lots of email addresses in people's CRMs that didn't have consent around whether they were able to receive marketing messages. So some organizations just went, well, we're going to send one email where people can opt in, and if they opt in, then we can keep them in our database, and everyone else is deleted. And then you had other CEOs who were like, well, that's 40,000 emails. That's all of our database. But we're not doing anything with those emails. You know, they're not opening the emails. They're disengaged. They're not interested. So why are we keeping it? So again, I think that, you know, having data for data's sake is not the point that we're trying to make here. It's from my perspective, understanding what it is you're trying to achieve and building appropriate data points and benchmarking that would measure that performance piece in particular, as you've already said. So, you know, what are we trying to achieve, and what should that look like? You know, what does success look like, and what data points, if any, can we capture to measure that on these bigger key strategic pieces? Interesting.
It's all just very human, isn't it? I think it's a human in all of us to want to have something to show for what we've done. And it can feel scary to say, actually, maybe we don't need this data because we're not doing anything with it and it's not helping us that much. That feels quite confronting even to say that. So I think I'd just say there's this is a very human response to things, and it's not like a criticism. It's just the way it is, and we can keep that and think about how we push a bit better, or how we prioritize looking at measuring more performance-based things for our strategic projects.
It's the way we've always done things. And again, that's not like, there's not an opinion to be had on that. It is what it is. This is the way it has been done. But we have, experienced an immense amount of disruption through technology alone. We have to adapt to those changes because that impacts the organizational landscape. That impacts the attentiveness and engagement of the employee, not just from a learning perspective, but more broadly from that culture piece that you talked to and the employee experience piece, of which learning plays a role. It's, I think for me, the truth is we just can't continue to go in the way that we're going because we know it's not always the most successful approach. I agree, less is more. It's not, maybe at a time when there wasn't a huge amount of learning technology available, having lots of learning experiences was a really cool thing and a lot of people loved that. But now things are changing again. We need to then maybe go back to the drawing board a little bit. Don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Plenty we can retain and plenty we can keep. But there's got to be that process of who's this for? What are we trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I'm conscious that we're very much at time and I don't know if you have a hard stop or not, but I just wondered if there was any parting thought that you might want to add, or maybe like one quick tip around the kind of learning experience that you've seen to be really effective for your clients, or something that you would always do in a project, no matter the scale, size, or scope of it. What can L&D do to really improve the employee/learner experience?
I would say just always ask the question, what are we expecting people to do differently after this learning experience, or after this as yet undefined solution? But what are we hoping people will do differently? So not what do we want them to be aware of, not what do we want them to learn, but what do we actually want them to do differently? And if there isn't an answer to that, perhaps you don't need anything. And if whatever that answer is, that will then, I think, begin to shape the solution, because it's about how do you empower people to act and do things differently.
Love that. Excellent parting thought. Georgie Cooke, CEO and Head of Learning Experience Design at Lima Delta. It's been a wonderful discussion with you. Honestly, I really love your candor in terms of, it's very clear you really think about what you're saying, and I've no doubt, I've seen you firsthand, the work that you do. It's amazing. So thank you so much for giving me an hour, and everybody, all of our listeners, your time to come and share some thoughts on employee experience design, learning design, and maybe how we can just start to rethink the box that we're stuck in.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I've loved talking about all things audience and culture, and how we give people what they need. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Yeah, no problem. Well, I'll include your LinkedIn in the show notes as well. So if anybody wants to connect with Georgie and talk a little bit more about this with her, you're more than welcome to. And I'll also have a link to Lima Delta's website as well. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
Just to say, I could talk about this stuff all the time. So if anybody wants to just have a chat, LinkedIn's a great place to find me. Love to keep on chatting.
Yeah, perfect. See, you need a podcast. That's why I had to get one, because I was like, all I do is rant about marketing. I'm going to have to do a podcast because this is ridiculous. I just am like, so angry. I'm not that angry. I'm a little bit angry. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Georgie. I really appreciate your time. It's lovely to see you so well. And we will be probably chatting on LinkedIn soon enough.
See you soon.
All right. See you later. Bye.
Bye.